couple of years later, the Springbok tour came along, and all my mates were, it's about rugby, and fuck off, it's not about rugby, it's about racism. And I had read that when the New Zealand division went to war, and they went by ship, the Māori battalion went in a ship called the Aquitania. It stopped at Cape Town, and they weren't allowed off the ship in South Africa. And I said, this is about our tūpuna. We're sending troops away to die for this country, and the New Zealand division is allowed off the ships, but not Māori soldiers. And that made me angry.
Thank you for giving up your time and being here today, and looking forward to having this kōrero. But I guess before we get into it, do you want to just start by, without going all the way back to kupe, tell us who you are?
He mokapuna no muri whenua, no ngā iwi katoa o muri whenua. So Hector Matthews. I born in Kaitaia. My maternal grandparents are from Ahipara. Well, actually, one of them is from Ahipara. The other one is from Waimahana, Ngāti Kahu. I can whakapapa to every iwi in muri whenua. Every iwi in Tai Tokero, actually, when I take my paternal side. But because my koro, my grandfather, was from Ahipara, those are the memories of my childhood where I went to. That's the beach I went to. Those are the people that nurtured me and my whānau when we were young. So that's home for me. Although Waitaha has become my home.
Yeah,
Which
we'll get into all of that stuff. But you're saying because it was that Ahipara Te Rarawa side that really looked after you when you were young, that's the side that you often talk about when you talk about whakapapa.
Yeah, that's right. When the memories of my childhood are of Whangatawatia, the southern bay of Te Oneroa Atohe, and that's a stretch of beach that's precious to Te Rarawa and Te Aupōuri, and actually Ngāti Kuri, who protect Te Reinga at the north of that. My grandmother's people, Ngāti Kahu, on the eastern side, Ngai Takoto and Awanui, Kaitaia area, and so we have whakapapa to all of those. But my grandfather was actually a farmer in Ahipara, and so that became home. That's where my mum went to school, and that's where we would go to church. The marae there, different marae now. Our marae is, Ngāti Moraki's marae is kōrero kore, but it was never there when I was a kid. Mum told me later that was their marae, but it was, where it is now, was destroyed in a storm and never rebuilt back in the 50s, so I have no memory of that. So we used to go to Roma, Ohaki, and that's the marae we used to go to. When I say go to, I was a kid who couldn't speak te reo Māori, so we just played them.
That's what marae are for?
Yeah, that's right.
Among other things?
Among other things. So that's home for me, and it'll always be home because my mother's buried there, my grandparents are buried there, whānau are buried there. I walk through that urupā, and those are my people. But my people are in lots of other urupā as well. I've got whānau in other urupā, and they're also precious to me as well.
Ka pai. Oh, that was a really nice sort of quick summary, but I'm keen to sort of scrape beneath the surface and find out a little bit more about those early years. Can you tell me a little bit about those early formative years? What were your early years like?
Yeah. So we spent our first few years in Kaitaia. That's where my sister and I were born. I got an older sister, a year older than me, I don't have any actual memories of this, but my mum has told me that they went, her and my dad went share milking in Lee, which is another place just north of Auckland, so in Tai Tokero as well. And it's interesting, Mum always told me she hated milking, because I used to do a bit of milking sometimes for whānau. When I say milking, what that means is cleaning up the cow tiko. But she hated it because, milking, dairy farming is hard work. It's muddy, you don't get any holidays. But anyway, they went share milking. And then we bounced around a wee bit, lived in Tūrangi for a while, and then bounced up to Auckland. Anyway, in the late 60s, 1969, we moved to West Auckland, Henderson, and then that kind of began what my sister and I describe as the chaotic years.
Why were they chaotic?
Well, it was punctuated with violence. I talk to my dad now, and he has his versions of stuff, but his versions differ to mine. And my sister and I have, memories of Mum being given a hiding multiple times to the extent of, bleeding, bruising, putting herself between Dad and my sister and I, so taking beatings to protect us. Anyway, it got chaotic, and then Mum made a decision that, I assume she did because that's what happened, that she was going to get out of there. Dad kidnapped us, he took us. That was a really scary experience. My sister and I still talk about that, how scary that was. We didn't know where we were. We woke up, we were scared, we were crying. And then a day or two later, Mum found us. And I remember asking her years later, how the hell could she find us? And one of Dad's whānau helped her to his cousin.
What do you think what led your dad, my kōrero, to do that?
I've subsequently found out that he had a traumatic childhood. At the age of 4, he was whāngaid out to a whānau in Ngāti Pikiao. I won't name the whānau, but there was a kōrero who was a veteran from the 28th Māori Battalion. Wasn't a kōrero then, but he raised him, and another woman from Tūhoi, who he kept contact with because he has great affection for her. I didn't know any of this when I was young, but this kōrero, from the sounds of things, had some serious PTSD and was quite violent to him in really nasty ways. So he got dealt to many times physically and mentally. So he grew up an angry young man. He took off at 13 and returned back to his whānau. He had 2 sisters and another brother, and he found his whānau, and there was a bit of drama around that, but he came back to his whānau. But he spent 9-10 years in a really traumatic environment. So that was his story. And I believe that he had that, but he was an angry young boy, and when he met Mum, it came out in other places. So I grew up hating him. I just wanted to wait till the time I was old enough to beat the shit out of him. I grew up an angry young boy as well. But in those chaotic years, when Mum found us, we took off back to Kaitaia. She got in touch with my grandfather, he picked us up, and we went back to Kaitaia. So I was 5 or 6. I call those chaotic years sort of, the early 70s. And in Kaitaia, I always felt safe around my grandparents, but there was also a niggling feeling. My grandmother in particular considered me my father's son, so I was the point of blame for the violence that my mum had suffered. So Mum sent me away. She sent me to kōrero. She had 4 brothers at the time working at the mill in kōrero. So I went to another place which I consider home, kōrero, because I had my uncles and aunties around me there and all my cousins, and I just loved it. I got heaps of whānau who to this day live in the shadow of Pūtauaki, and if people who in the Eastern Bay of Plenty know Pūtauaki and know the kōrero around that maunga. I love that maunga, I love that place. I've got heaps of cousins there that I spent my childhood days with. I went to school in kōrero for a while until things settled down, and then Mum got me back on a railways bus back to Kaitaia, and my sister and I both went to Kaitaia primary school for a little while, until things settled down, until Mum was happy that Dad was out of our lives.
So how old are you around about this time?
7.
Okay.
7.
A lot to squeeze in a pretty short amount of time.
Yeah. My years from sort of 5, from starting primary school through to standard 1, which is year 3. Yeah. So those 3 years were just chaotic, and the only thing that was constant was whānau. It was my grandparents, Mum, my sister, my grandparents, and my uncles and aunties, and my cousins. So, and interestingly enough, my cousins too on Dad's side. Mum made a real effort to keep in touch with our kuia on Dad's side. She lived in Otara in Auckland, and his siblings over there. So my cousins on both sides of my family, I still have great aroha for today, and we, when we can, we keep in contact, and they're a central part of my life and feeling safe.
So you moved back to Kaitaia.
Yeah.
you and Auntie Sandra go to Kaitai Primary?
Yeah, for a little while until Mum was happy that Dad was out of our lives, and she didn't want to live with her parents. You know, she was an adult woman with 2 kids.
Right, so you were living, she was living with her
Yeah,
parents?
we were living with our grandparents.
Pāpā.
But she also knew that there was tension. My grandfather, I loved my grandfather. He was a really important person in my life. I loved my grandmother too, but he was my father figure.
Sorry.
It's just the memories coming back, eh? She loved her mokos, but I was my father's son, and I was the blame for the violence that happened to Mum for a long time, so I was treated differently. That's why Mum sent me to kōrero. I'm just telling you.
Yeah, so you're saying your grandmother?
Yeah. I was treated differently to all the other mokos.
Because of your father?
Yeah. And my cousins knew that, and Sandra knew that. Not really bad, but, you know, I got shit jobs, and I was told off and disciplined for a whole bunch of things. I'm comfortable with that now because, I mean, that's her daughter who had the shit beaten out of her. I understand that. Yeah. And I love my grandmother. And it took her many years to overcome that, but we overcame that.
Did you ever talk about it with her?
Nah. But we had these sort of conversations later, you know, particularly after my grandfather died, and she was on her own because she was a sad and lonely woman, I think, after that. And she became far more affectionate towards me. And so without directly apologising, she kind of apologised, but we both moved on at that stage. So Mum didn't want to live with her grandparents too much. She wanted to be an independent person, you know, didn't want to rely on her. That was the sort of person she was. So she decided, she said, we're moving, we're going back to Auckland. So we went back to West Auckland. Because we had a little bit of a community. We had lived there but bounced around a wee bit. We went to West Auckland, and West Auckland became home. Henderson became home. And I went back to Formative Primary School. And Mum got a job cleaning. So back in the early 70s, there was no domestic purpose benefit, no benefits for women on their own.
Really?
Yeah, there was nothing. So she had to work, and she had young kids, so she would take us to work with her. She cleaned the YMCA in Auckland on Pitt Street, and a post office in downtown Auckland, Batten Post Office. My sister and I got lots of memories of those places. We'd go there, sleep in the corner, sometimes help her out. And then when she'd finished, we'd go to the bus terminal and take the bus back home. This went on for a few years until she thought we were old enough to stay by ourselves, and then she just locked the door. So don't let anyone in. And she'd go to work. Because, you know, if you're a Māori woman in the 70s with no education, she basically didn't have any school qualifications. Cleaning was about all you could do.
And she would do that at night, I presume?
Yeah, it was because these places were open during the day, so you clean at night. You know, that was our life for a while. So we became very independent, you know, make our own dinners. And
what are some of the, you know, looking back on it, some of the lessons that you probably learned from those early years?
The importance of whānau. My grandparents, my uncles and aunties. My uncles, aunties and grandparents and cousins were, at the time I didn't realise how important and precious they were to me. Years later, you know, you kind of figure it out. But they took up the slack. Because back then, almost no one had one person raising kids. It was a really rare thing. It was mostly 2-parent families. So whānau was at the centre of everything, and you could always rely on whānau. You know, and I remember Mum, you know, hearing a knock on the door and Mum saying, put the jug on. And I go, you don't know who it is. And
doesn't matter.
So it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter who it is. So, you know, and it was something, you know, my grandfather and my uncles, even today when I talk to my uncles who I've still got, just reiterate how important that sort of manaakitanga and aroha is. Interesting in kōrero, you know, I love kōrero, but survival. Kōrero was a staunch town in the 70s, and anyone who grew up in the Eastern Bay of Plenty will know that, you know, the mongrel mob, Boot Hill, Black Power, these are gangs from the 70s. Stormtroopers up north and Moerewa and so on. They started to cut a swathe through Māori communities because a lot of pohara whānau Māori back then, and, you know, whanaungatanga through gangs became a choice for some people. And so I always had mongrel mob around me in kōrero, but they were people who I never felt unsafe around. They were just whānau, distantly related, but they were whānau. But you had to be staunch, you had to look after yourself, and you had to being staunch was a big deal, and I carried that all the time. It's not so much a big deal now, but it was, survival was a big deal.
What does being staunch mean?
Oh,
When you talk about saying being staunch is really important, what does that mean?
not ever showing weakness, because you got hidings, I got hidings, and you had to defend yourself, and you got dealt to, and you had to deal to other people. I remember once I got a hiding in kōrero, and my auntie Rita, she went hunting with these people and dealt them, and I love that about her.
Yes.
This little Māori woman, and don't you mess with my nephew, and that was part of life. You had to survive. It's a place I love. It's full of aroha, but there's still, and most of those mobsters now are my age with kids and mokos, so they have a different attitude, but it's still there. It's still there.
Yeah, a couple, I understand. Okay, so you've given me a really good kind of understanding or snapshot of what those early years look like. I know you grow up, you go to high school. Where do you go to high school?
In West Auckland.
West Auckland.
Life was really tough. Mum was trying to find work. When we got to intermediate, she got a job in a factory.
Okay.
And it was a loud, noisy place. They used to make cans, spray cans and paint cans and so on. So a lot of welding and packing and stuff like that. But it was regular work. So she got a regular job with hourly pay, and she did a lot of overtime, Thursday nights, Friday nights and Saturday mornings. So she worked incredibly long hours, but we had regular income. So life changed for us because we had a regular income coming in. But she worked such long hours to get that money to pay. Like, school uniforms were expensive, and our uniforms were precious. If we ever took off our jersey or our shoes, they had to go into our bag, and we had to look after it. And I became the person, like, without wishing to sound old-fashioned, the man of the house. So I had to. Mum would every Thursday night work out the bills that had to be paid, give me the money for the bills, and I'd stick them into an envelope, put them in the bottom of my bag, hide them, and after school I would go to Henderson, which was like a ride or a walk a few k's away, and pay all the different bills, the power, all those sorts of things.
How old were you? High school?
Intermediate. So Aria's age.
11, 12,
Yeah.
something like that?
From that age, I'd be going into Henderson, paying all the bills, and we'd be working out how much we have to pay every week, because things were on lay-by or hire purchase back then. So Mum was really good at sorting out regular payments so that we could eat and have stuff. So that was intermediate. In high school, West Auckland again, Waitakere College. I was playing league. I love league. Many of my mates, cousins and mates who played rugby as well. I liked rugby league. I was never very good. I wasn't fast. I didn't have the physical attributes. I couldn't pass or kick very well, but I could train hard. I trained hard. But I just loved the friendship and camaraderie that came with playing league. And although I wasn't very good at it, I was good enough to, and we didn't have a good team. We used to get hidings all the time, but we were good mates, and those guys are still mates today. I really loved that football because it was hard, relatively, but at the end of the game, you shake hands, you have after-match functions, sausage rolls and tomato sauce. So I love that about sport, and I've always enjoyed that about sport. So.
And obviously, you meet Mum in high school.
Yeah, she came into my life in the sixth form. It was at 1982, and I suppose looking back now, I was a ratbag at school. I pendulum swung between that nana kia who was always in trouble, because I was in trouble a lot. I got strapped. They used to hit kids at school with leather belts back then. I got strapped heaps of times, mostly for answering back to teachers.
Probably deserved it.
Yeah. And getting into fights. Get into fights because I was an angry boy, and I didn't know at the time. But angry at the flick of a switch, I'd start swinging and get into trouble, and so I get strapped for that. And I started to try and calm myself down a wee bit by the time I got to intermediate, and high school, and I think sport helped me do that.
Yep.
You know, you had to settle down and stop being a dick.
You good coaches?
Oh yeah, I had good coaches.
Good coaches will teach you that, eh?
Yeah.
You can't afford to lose your shit on the field.
That's right, because you just give away points, eh?
And now you're impacting the whole team.
Yeah.
Collectively.
And that's a really important thing, eh? Don't let down the team, whanaungatanga, and you learn, I don't want to let down the team, so you sort your shit out. So that was really helpful. And so I started to get into less trouble at high school, but I was clever. School was never really a challenge for me, and I think it annoyed some of my teachers because I could pass all the tests and do all the stuff without doing too much work.
So you're a rat bag,
but
academically, you were fine.
Yeah,
which is frustrating for a teacher.
It's frustrating for a teacher.
Probably because they saw a lot more potential in you, I guess, maybe, but also because...
I had that conversation with teachers. I see so much more potential in you, Hector, if you did this, and whatever. Exactly. So, I remember getting caned at school. We were reading a play in the fourth form, and one of the characters was Pine, P-I-N-E, and the person reading was saying Piney. He knew it was a Māori name, but he didn't know how to say it, and he was going Piney.
Deliberately?
Yeah, no, he knew it was Māori, but he just didn't know
how to say it. Okay.
And I would interrupt him because he was a mate of mine, and I said to the teacher, he's mispronouncing that, it's Pine. Not that I knew how to speak Te Reo Māori, but I'd heard enough Te Reo Māori to know that it was Pine. And I got told, Hector, I'm the teacher, and so I'd lose my shit. Whether do you get off trying to teach me respect for English, because this is an English class, when you have no respect for my language? Well, the result was...
Sure, that went down well.
It didn't go down well, yeah. But a badge of honour to get caned, because he came out of there staunch.
Yeah.
Anyway, caning wasn't nice, it hurt, and you had to be staunch not to cry.
Yep.
So
was it public?
No.
It was,
No, it was quite a torturous process. Same with strapping, you'd wait outside the dean's office, and when I say torturous, they'd make you wait for ages, and then you had to lean over a chair. Sorry, that was caning. Strapping, you stuck your hand out. Nasty, really. When I look back at that, it was nasty. When I think about the violence that teachers would impose on kids. I was strapped at 5 years old, and if you think about kōtuku or mana when he was 5, if someone did that to my kids, I would have been down there and I'd have been on every bloody TV channel saying these people should be dealt to. Anyway, but
this is what it was normal though, eh?
It was normal, yeah.
I guess that kind of shows the danger of normalising things, eh? When you look back on it and you go, why did we let that happen? But because it was normal, no one questioned it? Yeah, well, this will annoy a few people. I've had this conversation with Mum, but it's deeply embedded in the Anglo-Saxon Judeo-Christian heritage. So spare the rod, spoil the child is a deeply embedded part of the Judeo-Christian heritage and therefore the Anglo-Saxon heritage. And what does that mean?
So spare the rod. If you don't hit the child, you will spoil him. Spare the rod, spoil the child. So it's deeply embedded.
So in other words, if you don't want to spoil the child, hit them.
And it's one of the things that, Cook made the observation when he arrived in Aotearoa that Māori kids weren't punished, weren't hit. And as a result, from his perspective, they were naughty. I should get back on track. I met Mum in the sixth form.
Yep.
And I just thought she was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen.
Bee's knees.
Yeah. Truth be known, I probably fell in lust with her, to be honest. But, we slowly got to know each other as you do when you're awkward teenagers.
Yep.
And she came to my 17th birthday party. And, we slowly got to know each other.
What was your 17th birthday party like?
It was a big... I think it was the first party that I'd ever had, because we never had birthday parties when I was a kid, and Mum had to agree to that.
Yeah. So was that your place?
Yeah, it was at our place.
In a garage or something?
No, we didn't have a garage, so it was in the house.
Yep.
Lots of my cousins came, and heaps of people stayed the night. Like in the morning, there was like people sleeping on the floor, and anyway, Mum, we got to know each other, and I never thought that she would ever be interested in me. I had issues about my own sort of self-esteem. I didn't know that, but I now know.
Looking back.
Yeah, looking back. And why would she be interested in me? But,
she obviously was.
Yeah, and we slowly fell in love, I guess. That's what happened. And so by the time we got to the seventh form, we were a thing. And I got to know her whānau, and her whānau were awesome. Her parents had broken up, and they had moved from Napier to Auckland, and her grandparents lived in West Auckland, and that's how we ended up being there. Her grandfather was a veteran of 2 world wars, born in 1895, so he was an old karaua.
1800s.
Yeah, and he ran away to sea at 12, and finally landed in New Zealand after the war. And I remember talking to him. I was just so fascinated by his stories.
So he left where?
So he was at sea. So he ran away to sea, became what's called a merchant.
Where was he living? Where was he born?
England.
Okay.
Yeah, England.
And that's how they ended up here in Aotearoa.
Yeah, so he had lots of awesome stories.
Yeah, I bet.
But he was a beautiful, beautiful man. Smoked the pipe. I can remember the smell of that pipe. Like my grandfather smoked pocket edition. I used to roll his cigarettes. And so, I'm not a fan of smoking because Mum smoked when I was a kid and I used to buy her smokes, but the smell evokes memories of those times being with those people. Yeah, we became, Mum and I just became that thing, and I had decided in the beginning of the 7th form that I wanted to join the army. My dad's older sister had remarried my uncle Dick Rawiri, and he was a soldier in Vietnam, and I remember talking to him about that. My uncles are just had such a profound influence.
So that's on your dad's side?
On my dad's side.
So despite that relationship having broken down, you still stayed in touch with his whānau?
Mum stayed connected to that side of the whānau. Whānau was really important to her, so she stayed connected to my grandmother. So she was Pākā. She's the only Pākā of my 4 grandparents. My koro was Māori. He's a machu from Pangaru, but had whakapapa in Ngāti Whātua and Ngāpuhi. But yeah, we stayed connected to her. So he died when I was quite young, but I memories of being with him and her and my dad's siblings, his older sister, Auntie Merle. She's a beautiful woman, and she helped me out with whakapapa years later. And her kids, I still keep in touch with her kids today, my cousins there. So yeah, whānau was always central, but we would go and see them all the time.
You mentioned before he was a machu.
He was a machu, yeah.
And so somewhere along the lines, machu becomes Matthews.
Native school.
Do you know the story behind that?
Yeah,
and how that happened?
Yeah, the native schools. So they did that like if you look in Ahipara, there are people whose surname are Nathan, and some who are Ngātanahira, some who are Wāta, some who are Walters, some who are Wāka, some who are Walkers, Norpetas, nobles, and you peel back the layers and you find that the native school in Ahipara, the native school in Pangaru, the native school in Kai, all these native schools anglicised surnames. And if you had a Māori name like Norpeta, the school anglicised those names. It was easier to get around with an English surname, as terrible as that sounds. Much easier to get around.
Well, it still is. Yeah. I think it's changing. But it's still
slowly. Yeah. I mean, that's why your name's English. I had this discussion with Mum, and I wanted te reo Māori names, but she was fearful that there would be kickback on that. And in the 80s, because you were born in 89, that was a real possibility. So I only got Maya.
Well, Jess and I had that conversation as well on a previous episode. So I think it's changing. So our whānau surname, was Machu, and it was changed to Matthews in whose generation?
In his. He was a good, kind fella, but he was, kiri mangu, eh? And when you're kiri mangu in this country, it's much harder.
Anything to sway the odds in your favour.
Yeah, that's
like a surname. So your dad was a Matthews, not a Machu.
Yes, he was a Matthews.
And therefore married Hinekehu. Your mum becomes a Matthews.
Yeah.
You become a Matthews.
Interesting that Hinekehu, that was her name, Hinekehu. Almost no one knew her by Hinekehu. Her siblings knew she was Hinekehu. Everyone in the world knew her by her second name, which was Gladys. Hinekehu was her grandmother.
For the same reason?
Yeah.
Just easier to get around?
Most people butchered her. I remember people, I remember cops coming to our place after she got a hiding one day and calling her Haini Kihu. Just cops. Cops is another different story, but I grew up just hating cops, because I just found them useless. They'd turn up after a domestic disturbance and they would do nothing. Absolutely nothing. Mum's sitting there, we're sitting there crying, and they just tell Dad, don't do that. But they were just fucking useless, absolutely useless. They did nothing to protect Mum. It was an acceptable thing for men back in the 60s and 70s, and I found cops to be absolutely useless back then. Now, there might have been individuals who helped, but I never met any. So I just didn't.
There's always exceptions, of course, but you're saying systemically. Back then, your experiences, your lived experiences, they were kōrero.
Yeah, and that was reinforced with things like, part of the reason why I was an angry Māori boy, things like, Bastion Point. And I was young when that occurred, but I saw Māori fighting for their people and their land, and being treated like shit by cops. And when the cops moved in that day, and I remember seeing Māori cops, one or two, not many, and I think, what are you doing? Why are you here? But I now understand that they were probably torn because they still had to put food on their table and feed their families.
That's right.
And they were put into situations where they had no control over. So, Bastion Point had a profound impact on me. The Land March, again, I'm growing up now. I'm this angry Māori boy. And then later on, following on from that, Maturata, who was our Māori MP, left the Labour Party because he wanted the government to ratify the Treaty of Waitangi. I didn't know what that meant. My grandfather used to tell me about that.
Yep.
And
because this is pre-principles, pre-Waitangi Tribunal. Yeah. So ratify the treaty back then meant get Te Tiriti o Waitangi recognised in legislation.
That's right. I didn't know what that meant, but my grandfather would always say to me, ratify the treaty. I was on the fringes of that because I was a kid, really at intermediate and early high school. But it had a profound impact on me. And then a couple of years later, the Springbok tour came along, and all my mates were, it's about rugby, and fuck off, it's not about rugby, it's about racism. And I had read that when the New Zealand division went to war, and they went by ship, the Māori battalion went in a ship called the Aquitania. It stopped at Cape Town, and they weren't allowed off the ship in South Africa. And I said, this is about our tūpuna. We're sending troops away to die for this country, and the New Zealand division is allowed off the ships, but not Māori soldiers. And that made me angry. And so I said, why are we playing these people in rugby? This is not about rugby. This is about people being racist. And New Zealand we were the poster children in the 70s for supporting apartheid. We were playing a country that in legislation, because people say this is apartheid, but actually there was only one country in the world who had legislation that said black people are not, actually America had it as well.
But apartheid only existed
in South Africa. So it just made me angry because I had read about the Māori battalion, and they were some of my inspirations for wanting to join the army. And then, look at what these people did for our country, and this is how they were treated. We should never be supporting this country, and it was never about rugby. And you can see, if you look at videos of 81, it polarised the country, and it was about those who thought it was about rugby and those who thought it was about racism. And I would suspect that many people who thought it was about rugby now, more than 40 years later, deeply regret not making it about racism, because that's what it was about. And I suspect many people who are on the wrong side of history, because now apartheid's gone, won't be proud to tell their kids and their grandkids that they were on the wrong side of history. It was a profoundly momentous time in New Zealand history, and I was an angry young man. I was really clear in my mind about the levels of racism that existed in this country, because I'd experienced it.
I'm interested to talk about the army because you touched on it before.
Yeah.
So, and you sort of talked about your inspiration to join the army, but tell me about that period of time. What made you join the army, and what was that like as a 18-year-old?
Yeah, 17, 18. I decided as an 18-year-old, I was 17 going into the 7th form, turned 18 that year. And I had done a lot of research over the holidays prior to going into the 7th form, and I decided, because I'd read about the Māori battalion, to me the military was noble, courageous, staunch, and I was drawn to that. So I'd done some research, and I figured I was good enough to be an officer, and I'd figured out what pathway you needed to take to do that, to train to become an army officer. So I went into town, filled out all the recruiting forms, and I got selected to go to what was called a regular officer selection board. I had no idea what I was getting into, and that was a week of psychometric testing. I didn't know that's what it was back then, but that's what they were doing. Physical tests, we did heaps of running around, press-ups and running, and more tests and more interviews. for a week. It was a hell of an interview process. And then on the last day, also, like, we were eating in the officers' mess. I'd never been to anything like that. I had to take a tie and jacket. I had to borrow stuff, find a jacket. Anyway, it was all pretty exciting, but actually I had no clue, really. And then on the 5th day, they said, yep, you've been selected to go to Duntroon, which is a 4-year university course in Australia, as well as being a bit like what I guess most people might think about West Point. New Zealand would send 10 people a year to Duntroon, and you're part of the Australian Army.
Okay.
It was their military academy, but Mum said, I don't want you to go to university in Australia for 4 years because that might mean
Wait, see you.
So I had asked if I could do the other course, the 12-month course. So they said yes, and so I did my officer training in Wairu in 1984. Was the hardest, most tumultuous, frantic, full-on training that I'd ever done, and the people that came through that with me are still some of my closest brothers today. The development from a boy to an army officer was incredible. I've done a lot of jobs, and I hear a lot of people outside the military talk about leadership, and my lived experience is most people outside the military don't have a clue about leadership. They really don't know, because leadership, and you learn this in the military, is not about management. It's about people, and if you have to lead soldiers in places where they might die, that's actually what you were trained for. You're putting people in harm's way. There's got to be a reason why they follow you, and so you learn how to lead people, and you're not good at it when you're 18, 19. It takes years to do that, but they nurture that, and they have systems around you. I had such good senior NTOs, corporals and sergeants who were leaders, and you learn how to empathise with soldiers. That was incredibly difficult, but a huge growing experience. I literally went from boyhood to manhood, and even when I graduated as a second lieutenant, I was incredibly young. At the end of '84, I was only 19. There were 3 of us who were 19 at the stage, and we were still young, but I was blessed to have, when I graduated, the first jobs I went into, I had really good NCOs, non-commissioned officers, corporals and sergeants, and anyone who knows anything about the military, they are the backbone. They are the people who teach you, help you, guide you. It's one of the really good things about the military is, they teach their command structure to be young, because you need young people nurtured, but they have systems around them to help grow that. That was a wonderful time, and I really loved my time in the army. But you were born in '89, and I missed lots of your first milestones. Missed your first birthday, your first words, your first steps. I nearly missed your birth.
Doesn't matter.
And I know you
I don't remember it.
Yeah, it was more important.
Probably matters more to you.
Yeah, it was more important to me. And so I started having conversations with Mum and saying, I don't want to be that. And it's interesting, when you came along, I'd also had, I was really worried for many, many years about me becoming dad, becoming that violent individual. And so I never, ever hit you guys, because hitting was still acceptable. And I said to Mum, I'm not going to be the discipliner.
Why did you make that decision? Did you not trust your instincts?
Yeah, I didn't trust my instincts. I was worried that there was this somewhere deep buried in my mauri, my wairua, my whakapapa, I don't know, I couldn't explain it, that I might become dad. And my sister used to tell me, don't be stupid, Heck, you're not dad. And Heather, Mum would say the same, but I just had this niggling worry. It really wasn't until Maya came along that I realised I wasn't dad, I was a different person. But it took me a long time to figure that out. So shortly after you came along, I met Mita Mohi. I was still in the army, and there were some soldiers who'd gone out to these things called taiaha wānanga, and I knew what a taiaha was, and I'd heard the word wānanga, but I didn't really know. So anyway, I thought I asked my boss, my OC, my officer commanding, can I do one of these? Yeah, because soldiers were doing it. It's a new thing in the army at that stage, but it was kind of military. So I went out to a taiaha wānanga at a taumatu, and I met Mita. Mita had a profound impact on my life. Beautiful Māori man, beautiful te reo, te arawa, and he just helped so many young Māori men. And he didn't need to be staunch. He had aroha, and he just had all this stuff that I just loved so much. He had te reo, he had maurako, but he brought with it aroha. He would sit down and talk to us about looking after our wahine.
Do you think, looking back on it, that changed some of your ideas around staunch?
Yeah.
What it looked like to be a good man?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. He was a good man, and I watched the way he treated his wife. He loved his wife, and I mean, I treated Mum the same, but he didn't need to be staunch, and he was strong. He played league for the Kiwis. He was a professional wrestler. He was a staunch man, but he didn't need to strut his stuff.
It was a different kind of staunch, though.
Yeah, it was a different kind of staunch. Like, he was physically strong, and he knew he was able, but he just didn't need to prove that.
That's right.
And when you talked to him, he was just that gentle giant.
Humility, eh?
Yeah, full of humility, full of rangi Māori. So the taiaha wānanga and him had a profound influence on me and you. I used to drag you along to those wānanga at Taumotu and Onuku, and I loved our time there. It was a lot of whanaungatanga, and I'd go to Macquarie Island, spend time with them there, and I loved those times.
Is that where did your journey into learning te reo begin? Was that around about that time or before then?
Your birth, because I'd missed so much of your milestones. I'd talked to Mum, said I missed out on a lot. I want to learn some te reo Māori. So I enrolled in a course at Polytech, and I had Katarina Daniels. I'm going to get emotional again. It's just a beautiful wahine, a dignified, beautiful, beautiful wahine Māori. And she was so kind and gentle. With us Māori who had been urbanised and colonised. So she was my first step along the te reo journey, and it's when I first started learning things like a pepeha. So I knew all these things, but I didn't know how to say a pepeha.
Didn't know how to pull it all together.
So she was the real first kakano, and then Mita came along, and ironically they're both te arawa, and my auntie and kōrero, they were te arawa, tū whare tō. So te arawa had such a profound influence on me at that stage, her, Mita, and my whānau and kōrero. And it grew from there, and then I had decided, well, I want my kids, there was only one at this stage, to learn te reo Māori, and there was this thing called kohanga, which Mum said, okay, we'll go along to that. And as soon as we were there, ended up on the board, chairing the board. They were just other whānau, but I was an officer in the army, so I seemed to have a few clues. And anyway, I met Whaia Rhonda. I'm not even sure where, but she was running this kura. That's what we called it. But it was actually at Rowley Ave. So we called ourselves Te Kura Kaupapa Māori o Te Whānau Tahi, but we weren't funded for that because she'd started in a garage and taken a whole lot of kids from Rowley. And so they were losing funding for those kids, and then the principal invited them back and said, you can have room 5.
Yep.
And then the horo, and then room 8. And so they got the funding for it, but we were separate, and we were Te Kura Kaupapa Māori o Te Whānau Tahi, but we kind of had a little bubble around us at Rowley, and so that's where you went to kura to start with. And that was a big decision. I remember talking to whānau and friends, and people were worried that you wouldn't be able to speak English. Heaps of my whānau, they were worried. None of them would say no. So we sent you to this kura kaupapa Māori, and Whaia Rhonda, I just got so much admiration for Whaia Rhonda.
Yeah, she's good.
Because it's all about her, eh? And I mean, she had her quirks. She was staunch, but she was a wahine who was just trying to get te reo back, and she took us on a journey, and then Whaia Gwen and Mum became a part of that, and we just got soaked in, and I ended up being chair of the board, and I left the army because I wanted to become more a part of this, but I joined the territorial force, which was awesome actually, because the Canterbury Regiment had as a part of it old soldiers like Charlie Upham and Jack Hinton. They were both VC winners, and I got to meet people like that, and they were beautiful people, staunch.
Awesome stories.
Yeah, awesome stories. I was a pallbearer for Charlie Upham's tangi, but staying connected to the army meant New Zealand got on the Security Council, UN Security Council, and I got a phone call one day because I was in the TF,
Territorial Force.
Territorial Force here, TF. There's a peacekeeping mission. That sounds exciting.
Yeah.
So I said yes. Mum was hapu with Maya at the time, and she said, what the hell are we going to do? Because it wasn't a married post, it was only 12 months. You could take your family, but you had to pay for it yourself. So we had a choice to make. Mum was hapu with Maya, and she was due in June, and I was due to go away in May. So it was right on the edge of Mum even being able to fly. So she had to go to the GP and said she was okay to fly. And we had a decision to make. Does she stay here for a year, have the baby while I'm away? Does she come and she said, I'm not staying here? Nana, my mum, was not happy with that. She said, oh, you go. I don't care, you go away, but don't you take my mokos. Don't you take my mokos. Heather and the mokos stay here and I'll look after them. But anyway, we went. And Maya was born in Israel, Palestine, depending on what side of the fence you live on. I don't know if you remember, we buried her pito. You probably don't know the puke, but it was the Mount of Beatitudes.
Yep, no, I remember.
We got a video of it.
Yep.
With our e-tool, burying the placenta there.
Yeah.
I had to ask an order of nuns that were there, and I asked them if I could bury it there. I don't really think they understood what I was talking about.
Probably just want to get you out of there. Here, go away. Whatever you got to do.
That's right. But
do your Māori stuff.
Exactly right, and they didn't even know Māori really. The language wasn't that good, but we buried them. They were by these gum trees, eucalyptus gum trees, which I had been told and subsequently found out it was true. The Anzacs had planted these gum trees because they were Australian eucalyptus gum trees.
Yeah.
And we got heaps of them around here as well.
Yep.
Planted in 1915 while the Anzacs were training in Palestine, which historically actually happened. So that's where Maya's pito was buried. Yeah, and that was in Israel.
So we spent Israel and then moved on to Syria.
Yeah, we spent 6 months. So from May to November, we were in Israel. You guys lived in Tiberias, which is on Lake Kinneret, as the Israelis call it. The Sea of Galilee, as the Bible calls it. So it's where, historically, in the Bible, Jesus did his ministry. Nazareth was just up the road. We'd go to Nazareth to do shopping because Nazareth was a Christian town and you could get bacon. There's a lot of historical stuff, and you think they were really close together. And the Jordan River, a bit of a letdown, really a bit of a creek, but the Jordan River wasn't too far away. And the Sea of Galilee, smaller than Lake Taupo, so it's a small lake. But that's where Mum lived, and she would drive up. There's hills that overlook that part of Israel called the Golan Heights, which was occupied by Israel in the 67 war. And that's where the UN peacekeepers were, sort of no man's land. And that's where I'd work week on, week off. And Mum would come up and see me sometimes with you guys. Yeah. And then we went to the other side of the Golan in Syria. She lived in Damascus, and I'd work on the Golan Heights from the Damascus side of things. Wonderful year, interesting year, hard, lots of interesting memories. You learn that, like I really thought when I went over there, I genuinely thought that I could make a difference to the peace in the Middle East. And then when you get there, you realise the issues are just too big. But you also realise at the level of the village, the people where they live, like some of those villages on the Golan Heights, either on the Israeli side or the Syrian side, all I ever met were good people. Yeah.
They're just people.
Yeah, that's right.
Living in what we would consider to be pretty shit circumstances, but they don't know anything different.
That's right.
I mean, I remember, if I think back to those, and I was only young, but the things that I remember are lots of weapons.
Yeah.
M16s.
M16s. And McDonald's, I don't know if you remember going into McDonald's in Israel.
Yep. It was normal. It was really, really normal to see assault rifles.
AK-47s in Syria, M16s in Israel.
That was generally how you could pick what side of it they were on, right? I remember lovely people. I remember lots of shawarma.
Souvlaki. Loved shawarmas in Souvlaki.
Kibbutz.
Yeah,
were they the village?
Yeah, we used to take you to a couple of kibbutzes. We used to take you on the Golan Heights. There's a lovely kibbutz that we could have shawarmas at.
And I remember going across borders and having to be a little bit secretive about, because can you remind me, you weren't allowed to bring certain kai or labelling into.
That's right. You couldn't have Hebrew writing on you when you crossed into Syria. So we took you across into Syria, into Jordan when we did Petra, Egypt, and Lebanon.
And you weren't allowed to take anything with Hebrew on it.
No Hebrew.
So for us, that was like bottled water.
Yeah, anything like that, you had to ditch it, or what we would do is plan beforehand to make sure that we didn't have any. That's why the UN issued you ID cards, because you had an ID card. Maya had one. Ridiculous, really. She had a baby photo.
And we would drive around in UN cars. I remember those.
Yeah.
Those they were
Toyota.
They weren't Land Cruisers.
No,
Some of them were, but they were. There was another one, and it had the electric window at the back.
Forerunners.
Forerunners.
And we actually bought a Forerunner when
That's
we
right,
came back
because
to
they
New
were such
Zealand.
good trucks.
Yeah.
And I also remember lots of fresh fruit. We had an awesome fruit store just across the road. Used to go down there and buy mandarins by the kilo. Yeah, lots of good memories.
So that part of Israel, and in Lebanon as well. In Lebanon, it's the Bekaa Valley, and in Israel, they call that the Jordan Valley. And it was a fruit growing area, because that's where all the water comes off the Mount Hermon range.
Right.
That's why that lake is so precious.
And I remember the signs, mines. There were mines
Danger
everywhere.
mines. Mines were everywhere.
And you had to be really careful. As long as you stuck to the main roads, you were fine. But you
Don't
couldn't
go off
go
the main roads. There was one experience I had in Syria where some kids had blown themselves up on a mine. It was really so sad.
Did they die?
Yeah, they got blown to bits. But, in Syria, the land is mined, from the different wars. And mines are just awful because they're buried. But when you're pohara and you've got goats, because that's what most of them had, goats and sheep, that's how they survived. You either render the land useless or take your chances, and many of them would take their chances because there's not much else they can do up there. When you're poor, the government doesn't look after you, they have to look after themselves. So from time to time, someone would stand on a mine. If you stood on an anti-personnel mine, you might survive. If you stood on an anti-armoured mine, some of those were so old, and they'd come across an anti-armour mine, and it was terrible.
Yeah.
But that happened from time to time.
Yeah.
On the Syrian side of things, because they were poor and they needed to use the land. The animals had to graze. It was more common for an animal to stand on a mine, but that had a profound impact on them, because
it's your livelihood, right? That's
their
kai.
livelihood. Yeah.
And I also remember going to places like Jerusalem, Bethlehem, walking around the old city, and I vividly remember there was a nice side, and then there was a pretty karu pohara side.
That's exactly right. The Jewish side was really different to East Jerusalem, which was the Palestinian side.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember the Mosque Al-Aqsa and the Western Wall, because the old city of Jerusalem is magnificent, really. It just oozes whakapapa in history, eh?
Yep.
But you're right, there's a pohara side with graffiti.
You can tell.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't need to look at a map. You can tell which side you're on.
Yeah, it's kind of like you cross a line and all of a sudden the graffiti pops up. Yeah, it's right, the cafes, you can hear Arabic being spoken. And I never felt at risk there.
Oh, no, not at all. It's just as beautiful, just different.
Just different, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, it's great that you remember that.
Yeah, no, I do. Got lots of good memories.
Do you remember going to Gallipoli?
Yes, I do. I remember going there for Anzac Day.
Yeah, that was a big deal. All the Anzacs, so there were 6 or 7 of us New Zealanders, heaps more Australians, a couple of Canadians.
Yep.
And we had planned many months in advance that we're all going to go to Gallipoli, fly to Turkey, hire a bus collectively, go to Gallipoli and spend the dawn service at Gallipoli. And we all did that. It was a profound experience for me, because we'd all read about Gallipoli, but when you get there at dawn and it's freezing, and then you see how close the Turks and the Anzacs were, and then you just see the loss of life.
Yeah.
The graves everywhere, and you go to the Australian Memorial at Lone Pine, and then the New Zealand Memorial at Chunuk Bair. Do you remember doing a haka there?
Yep. Well, I remember. We've got photos and maybe even some video footage. So I remember when I watched it. I don't remember that, but I know it happened, and I've seen the footage and I've seen the photos.
So I was in uniform, and we were asked. We were lucky we had good seats, because I didn't think there'd be anyone there, because Anzac Day in New Zealand
is a big deal.
It wasn't back then.
Right.
No one turned up to Anzac parades, Anzac services, in the 80s.
Except military.
Yeah. And so, and this was the 90s. It started to change a little bit in the 90s. But, Mum and I would go to Anzac parades because it was work for me at dawn. And there was the only people who were there were old soldiers, old sailors, old airmen, and their families. And then we all go to the RSA and have scrambled eggs and sausages. and it was always the dawn service. The dawn service was, that's why, I don't know if you remember, I used to drag you fellas along the dawn services.
Yep.
And so when I got to Gallipoli and just saw hundreds and hundreds of young Australians and New Zealanders, not all young, what the hell's going on here? The 90s, something changed.
Yeah.
People would go along to it.
Also the significance of being at Gallipoli. For those who would attend a dawn and Anzac service, going to Gallipoli was, on the bucket list, right?
And they were there with their sleeping bags freezing because it was cold.
Yeah. Which was also another bit of context.
Yeah.
Because that's when it happened, obviously, on Anzac Day.
That's right.
The weather.
Freezing, really cold.
And it happened early in the morning, right?
Early
Obviously.
in the morning.
That's why we do the dawn service.
It's why, I find dawn services quite profound. Wake up in the morning, feel the cold, and feel what those people went through. Nothing could compare to what they went through. Machine guns being fired at them and people getting shot everywhere. But when you get there and you see how close they were, but you also see the profound respect with which the Turks now treat us
soldiers.
Yeah, and there's a beautiful quote. I won't quote it, but Ataturk. He was the person that turned to battle that day and basically was responsible for the defeat of the Anzacs at Gallipoli over several months. But he, said, "We now look after your sons," and it's beautiful. When I read that, I cried, and they do, and they lost more people than us, and it was their home. It wasn't our home, And we now know we should never have been in Turkey. It's their whenua, not our whenua. And I used to be opposed to our soldiers lying in other countries, but when I see the respect with which they treat our tūpapaku, I'm pleased we've repatriated, especially our people from Vietnam and Malaysia. But they really look after our tūpapaku, and
I'd like to think we would do the same.
Yeah, I would like to think so as well. But it was lovely to be there, and it's quite a learning moment when you realise the sacrifices people had made for us.
Kapai, yeah. So lots of good memories, eh?
Yeah.
Those times, those years overseas.
And learning, heaps of, you grow a lot when you're in, you start to realise. I remember when we got back to Aotearoa and Kura was there to meet us, I cried. I saw Rhonda, Tina, Kahu.
I remember them coming to the airport when we left.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think lots of them thought we weren't coming back. I don't think anyone knew. I was young.
Yeah.
I don't think many people knew what it was that we were going into. I personally, and whether you and Mum just did a good job of protecting us, I never felt unsafe. And I'm sure what you were doing was a lot more dangerous than where we were living. And I know, talk about guns and, I know there was a bomb that went off next door.
Yeah, bomb at New Year's Eve. I wondered if you remembered that.
So don't get me
wrong. Near the Meridian Hotel, where we used to go and get some croissants, yeah.
They were awesome. So, it was not New Zealand, and it gave me, and I think you as well, a huge amount of aroha for and appreciation for Aotearoa and how safe it actually was.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I never felt unsafe.
No, we protected you, but yeah, Kura's farewell at the airport was just beautiful. It showed where our whānau was, that they were sad that we were going, so that they farewelled us, and when they welcomed us back, I just cried to see them, to be back in Aotearoa, to be back into Waipounamu, and to know that aroha was still there and they were happy to see us. And then that started that tumultuous journey about getting recognition as a kura. It was a tumultuous time because resource consent hearings, and an awful time. And, I ended up on the front page of the press because there were meetings at that hall at Pioneer Stadium trying to stop the kura being built. And people came up with all sorts of reasons to not have a kura kaupapa Māori.
What was one of them? Can you remember what was the one that kind of sticks in your mind the most?
There was a mail drop around the Sprayton area that said, "Don't let the gangs come into our neighbourhood."
What gangs?
Because
kura.
Māori meant gangs. That was the mail drop around, and that's how I ended up on the front page of the press. And I went along to this public meeting and the resource consent hearing, which was awful. People were swearing at you kids. We asked to do a karakia beforehand, and we had people abusing our kids. It showed when you scratch the surface that there is deeply embedded racism I don't know if it's just unique to Christchurch because I've experienced racism all over the country. But yeah, people are happy for Māori to be there only on their terms and when it suits them.
Yeah, no, I get you. All right, Dad. Well, we've only really sort of scratched the surface, but to wrap things up, what's getting you excited at the moment? What's top of mind? What are you enjoying at the moment in life? And have you got anything that you're really looking forward to, or any aspirations for the future?
When I see kura now, I just marvel at how awesome it is. And when I think about those heady days at Rowley Ave, and even when we first moved in to Littleton Street, really we didn't know much about what we were doing. We were just parents and grandparents, with Te Aoturoa, and Fire Carol and, all these beautiful people who helped. We were just passionate about trying to do better for our kids and our mohos, and we did our best. And we were learning about Te Aho Matua, and I remember reading Te Aho Matua because it was only in Te Reo Māori to start with, and then when they wanted to put it into the Education Act, the Minister of Education, Wyatt Creech, said it had to be translated, and they didn't want to translate it.
Pretty tricky document to translate.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Properly. To capture its essence.
They agreed to translate it only for the legislation so that he would understand what was going into the legislation, because the ends justify the means. We needed kura kaupapa to be put into the education, Te Aho Matua to be put into the legislation. So it was helpful for me to actually, because I read the English version, but then you also realise as your reo gets better, that English can't actually describe Te Aho Matua. And we used to have, Whaia Ron would run these Te Aho Matua wānanga, and Whaia Renee would come down and we'd learn about Te Aho Matua, but we were learning as we went along. And then you don't realise till years later how profoundly awesome this document is and how wonderful the people were that composed it in those early days. So when I look at whare kura, not just whare kura, the kura now, I am in awe at what has been created and the people who started out. We didn't really know that we would create that. We just wanted our kids to learn Te Reo Māori and be a part of Te Aho Matua, because we believed in this. And, I remember when Mum used to come along, I don't know if you remember, she'd come along to some of the classes in Tuawera, and she didn't have enough, my mum didn't have enough Te Reo Māori.
She'd sit in the back then?
She'd sit in the back. And Whaia Gwen was so good with her, and she would sit there in silence, but she just loved being around her mohos. And, to answer your question, that's really what lights my fire now. When I look at Aria, she's so beautiful, she's so clever. She's growing. Not that it saddens me, but I want her to be my little baby because she's the mātāmua of mātāmua. But I listen to her reo, I watch her kapahaka, but just the way she conducts and composes herself, her being a tuakana, and then I see mana and all his glory and everything that he does, and I watch them both kōrero and the fruits of what we try to create. Because I just wanted you and your siblings to speak Te Reo Māori. And there was a period of time in your life where you left that behind, and I was really quite sad about that, but it's come back. So that's what lights my fire now, looking at our mokopuna. I just marvel at Mum, your mum, Pākehā woman, who has beautiful reo. She's a teacher at Kura Kaupapa Māori, and she's a mother of te rarawa children, a taua of mokopuna Māori, because we've multiple iwi, but you know what I mean. And she has stuck staunchly to that kaupapa, and I could never have done this without her. I often say this, I pinch myself that I picked a beautiful woman who I love tremendously, but she's had to give up lots in order to be that, and I love that. But now we look at our mokopuna and we go, wow, look at Aria, look at mana, kōtuku. I see a lot of kōtuku, the nanakia, because I was a nanakia, but I was not a good nanakia. She's a good nanakia. I don't know, it's hard to describe kōtuku, but I love that. And now we've got kahu, and they all...
He doesn't stop.
Yeah, he doesn't run. Yeah, it is, and it's beautiful
it's
to
see. It's going to be ultras.
But I look at Jess and I look at Tom and I think, again, they've had to be absorbed into our whānau, and I love them to bits because of that, and I love that. Because it could have gone, you look at lots of other whānau Māori who have married into Pākehā families and they've had to become Pākehā in order to survive, and I don't judge them for that because it's pretty tough. I've seen that even in my own wider whānau. They're still my whānau and I still love them. So, we made decisions which were being supported by our other halves, and I love that because those are courageous decisions in themselves, and so that's what lights our fire. We love spending time with our mokopuna. But, when I look at my mum who I think left school, left Kairai College in the 4th form, so never had anything, she's got 9 mokopuna. My mokopuna speak te reo Māori. I look at, your cousin Samantha who's raising her kids with te reo Māori, and so it takes multiple generations, and we've seen those fruits, and I saw that in Mum, at her tangi. I reflected on the fact that, she lived her life for her tamariki, and she missed out on so much, but she poured her heart and soul into her tamariki so that her mokopuna would not have to live the life that she lived, and that became true. And her mokopuna have grown that even more, and I love it. That's what lights my fire. That's what gets me going. Because I've been that person in the room who hasn't had te reo and felt whakamā. I don't want other people to feel that whakamā is a terrible thing. And I've got whānau, my own cousins who are like that, and I don't want them to feel like that. We want to nurture everyone. You get what I mean, eh?
I do, 100%. Pāpā. Oh, well. So, so thank you for your time. Thanks for sitting down and having this kōrero. I've enjoyed it. Have you enjoyed it?
Yeah, it has. You remember, you recollect things. I'm remembering my mum and my sister. Me and my sister and mum were so tight for such a long time. But I remember we were so lucky to have, despite the chaos, we were lucky to have whānau around us. And even though we didn't have te reo Māori, we were always in te ao Māori. We didn't have much, but we had lots actually. We were wealthy in aroha and whanaungatanga.
Well, I think that's it. I think that's us. So, look, I'm grateful for so much for you and Mum. But thank you for everything. Thank you for, I guess, first of all, making that decision to break that cycle of violence in your whānau. It's never ever something that we experienced, and I'm very, very grateful for that. Thank you for making that other critical and courageous decision to invest in te reo Māori, te ao Māori, and put your tamariki into, I guess, an environment where we were able to soak all of that up, so that we could be more well equipped than you were, than your mother, and again breaking that cycle and creating an opportunity for us to be proud to walk into our Māori, as well as obviously te ao huri, te ao Pākehā. But and look, and thank you for all of the hours down at the park kicking and being at all the games and supporting on the sideline and being there when things were good, but also when things were bad, and all of that stuff. I'm very, very grateful. And this was a good kōrero. I learned some stuff, but I think it will be the first of many kōrero. So hopefully you'll be back on the podcast. But thanks, Dad. I love you. And ngā mihi. Any closing thoughts?
Love you too. Ka nui tā roha.